everybody, and thank you for being here. My name is Christina Weil. For any of you who don't know me, I'm the co-president and co-founder of the Association of Print Scholars, which is sponsoring this lecture this evening. And we are delighted to welcome you here for what is our second Distinguished Speaker series, or second Distinguished Speaker, and it's one in a series that we hope to continue. And today we'll be hearing from Harriet Stratis, Senior Research Conservator at the Art Institute of Chicago. And just, I'm going to give you a little information about APS if you've never heard about it. We are a nonprofit professional organization that sponsors basically networking events and professional connection among people who study prints and printmaking. We have over 400 members who span across the country and internationally from a wide variety of professional affiliations. So we have conservators, collectors, curators, academics, many grad students. And it's a very vital group. So please feel free to look us up online, printscholars.org, and learn more about the things that we're doing. I did want to just mention one exciting development. We've just launched the beginning of a new APS grants program. We're giving small grants of sort of $500 to $1,000 to any kind of event that will kind of further scholarship on prints. So if you are having a symposium or anything where you feel like an extra $500 could help in your budget, we would be really delighted to have an application from you. And there's more information on our website. And then I just want to thank some people who made this event possible. The Graduate Center's Department of Art History sponsored us being here today. And then there are some APS officers, some of whom couldn't be here today, who helped pull together things on the back end, particularly Catherine Alkauskis, Alyssa German, Brittany Salisbury, and Allison Chang. After Harriet's talk, we will be adjourning for a reception upstairs in the Art History Lounge, which is on the 3rd floor. There are some signs to help direct you. It's not the easiest place to find, but if you have the type of memory where you can remember a room number, we'll be in 3108. But again, if we all go up together, you can just sort of follow your neighbor. And I hope that you can join us. So I'm going to introduce Allison Chang, who is Vice President of APS, who will now introduce our speaker.
Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight. Harriet Stratis is the Senior Research Conservator at the Art Institute of Chicago. She holds an MA in Art History and a certificate in Conservation from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. Over the course of her 28-year tenure at the museum, Harriet has published and presented talks on the materials and techniques of Odilon Redon, Edgar Degas, Mary Cassatt, and James McNeill Whistler, as well as her research on pastels and their inclusion in traveling exhibitions, the conservation of the museum's large collection of Soviet TASS posters, and most recently, the graphic works of Martin Puryear. With Martha Tedeschi and others, Harriet was a contributing author and co-editor of the Catalogue Raisonné, the lithographs of James McNeill Whistler. For the past 4 years, Harriet has been immersed in an in-depth technical investigation of the museum's holdings of Paul Gauguin's graphic works for inclusion in an online scholarly catalog of works by the artist in the Art Institute's collection. Her findings will be presented in the exhibition Paul Gauguin, Artist as Alchemist, that will open on June 25th at the Art Institute and then travel on to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris this fall. This research also forms the basis for her talk tonight, which is entitled, There's More to the Story, Integrating Paul Gauguin's Artistic Practice into an Exhibition Narrative. Please join me in welcoming Harriet Stratis.
Thank you. I'm happy you're all here to join us. It's like a reunion. It's like you're all family. So, right, let's do that. Okay, this is going to be a combination of sort of formal, informal. Please interrupt with questions. I'm thinking of this more as even like a class to sort of try out some of our ideas, show you where we went with things, what we were doing, and to also highlight a little bit this online scholarly catalog. So to get started, Over the past 4 decades, blockbuster exhibitions have taken center stage at major museums in the US and abroad. Many have focused on the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, so much so that Monet, Degas, Van Gogh, and Gauguin have become household names. After decades of scholarly study and public adoration, you may ask, what more is there to say? And in point of fact, there's a lot more to say, especially when sustained technical study and scientific analysis are thrown into the mix. When artists' biographies, influences, motives, materials, and techniques are examined holistically, a different dimension emerges that adds to our understanding of the artworks they produced and to the aesthetic underpinnings of that production. Paul Gauguin, known among friends and foes alike as a tinkerer, a bricoleur, a jack of all trades, integrated, I lost my place, doesn't it figure, right? As soon as I clicked. I see what I'm doing wrong. It's this I'm supposed to be using. Okay. Now we're on track. Integrated the making of ceramics, woodblock prints, and wood carvings into his practice side by side with painting. So here I show you the ceramic. I don't know why this is doing this. Let's see. Okay. So he experimented constantly and reused imagery interchangeably between art forms, often tracing and transferring identical subject matter. So here you see the bather in the painting, and then, of course, Leda again in the print. Now, I should also say that the Art Institute has a drawing of the bather as well, and we still haven't completed our study, but we think that just the head of Leda in the painting, that there's some evidence of tracing and transferring as well in that, but just the head and not the rest of the body. His repertoire of images actually remained quite static over a period of 2 decades, but his experiments with disparate media to represent identical imagery in new and different ways was constantly in flux. And when I say identical, I really do mean identical, because when you go from museum to museum and study some of these works and take mylar and do tracings, and then take your tracings and bring them to another collection where you're looking at another transfer drawing watercolor, you'll see very, very closely how forms line up. There are always some slight changes, but he'll move the position of a shoulder or the position of an arm, and then the remainder lines up with your tracing. He'll also take them and flip them and make mirror images, but it was always a constant process of tracing and reuse in imagery. So now I'm going to show you another example in ceramic. This is one of his, I guess, signature images, you can call it, Eve, in this case in ceramic. Then here, a very close relationship that was in the MoMA exhibition, where you have a very large pastel that was actually pricked for transfer, and the related painting. And now we come to the crux of at least my study, which is the graphic works. Gauguin's graphic output encompassed the production of myriad unique multiples. No 2 prints pulled from the same matrix were ever alike. So I'm going to start with this example. One of the questions that we really wanted to answer was establishing a chronology of production. Could you look at these prints and understand what papers, what materials were used at what moment in the development of the blocks? And indeed, we found that in the impression on your left, where you see it's quite faint, he made a lot of first and second state impressions on papers that were originally pink, various shades of pink, poor quality, thin. He did a lot of hand wiping, as you can see here in the form here, the winged form here, in the breasts, across the leg. Some of the incising was quite faint. So for these early state impressions, you see particular types of papers, particular types of manipulations. Then when he goes and he really finalizes the block and completes his carving, then he really relies on his use of materials in part to create these, again, unique multiples. So here, another impression, very different, where you see him skewing the printing. So he starts with a tone block that's a very bright chrome yellow. He prints the block in an ochre, and then he prints it again in black, each time skewing the printing slightly in a very deliberate manner. He then uses a stencil for these wings. And these were added with a very waxy material with solvent, and you can see the staining of the solvent on the back. So just very, very different, elaborate manipulations in each and every instance to create a different kind of image. In two other examples, on the bottom you see an impression that's been hand-colored. When we found these hand-colored impressions, we found that they were most often printed on very fibrous, absorbent Japanese papers. We also found that he would not laminate in the modern sense of the word, but he would take one piece of Japanese paper that often had a laid line impression, a shoe impression. Then he would take another piece of Japanese paper that didn't have any impression, was just a wove paper. He would sit it on top, and then he would print them together. Now, I should say that he didn't use a press, that he was using, and I'll show you later in the talk how that comes about, but he's really just using the back of a flat tool, the back of a spoon, and he's printing by hand. So these papers, there was no adhesive laminating them together. It was just the pressure of printing that caused them to adhere. And as you can see, the washes that went on top really have this very fluid, liquidy appearance. I juxtapose that with the print at the top, where again, you're seeing a very waxy, resinous material. You're seeing the use of a stencil. You're seeing wiping in the figure, and I don't think it's coincidental that the wiping here mirrors the wiping here. And it's always with this idea of doing something that's visually different and never concern for even printing. We like to call these prints, I just learned a term recently that printmakers use called salty, that these are all printed in a very salty way so that you're not getting even black printed throughout. So that gives you just a general sense. We're dipping into those. So now I'm going to move on, and we're going to talk about these. His monotypes. Gauguin never pulled a no monotype was ever pulled from paper or glass as a single entity. Often, several pulls were taken from a matrix using a variety of papers, each impression more ethereal in appearance than the one that preceded it. Sometimes Gauguin would refresh the matrix with added washes of color. Sometimes he heightened the monotype directly. And in our study, we learned that he did two types of transfer. He did paper-to-paper transfer. In fact, there's a very important work in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art that acted as the matrix for two monotypes that were pulled from it that are in the Art Institute's collection. he went from the paper-to-paper monotype to what we're referring to as a glass-to-paper transfer, where he is brushing his design onto a piece of glass and transferring the media from the glass to the paper. We tried to reproduce these methods in Chicago, and when we reproduced them on glass, we could get as many as 6 impressions that were still viable impressions. You could keep going, but then they really started to fade and were quite diminished. But it was amazing when you then looked at that piece of glass, how much media still remained on it. The other way he could use the glass was if he had a drawing, he could put that drawing, and remember, we're constantly talking about iteration and tracing. He could take that drawing, put it under the piece of glass, so that then when he applied media onto the glass, it would have, again, not identical in the stroke for stroke, but in those compositions, there are very clear parallels because how he's essentially using the glass to trace the underlying drawing. So I hope that gives you a sense of how he's making these monotypes. Yes?
If he's tracing the image on glass, would he have to do it in reverse before he prints it?
No, because then what's printed is in reverse.
Oh, yeah, it starts out.
Right, so it starts, and you often see him going back and forth. So he'll make a transfer in one direction, then he'll take that transfer, put a piece of paper on top of it, trace, and bring it back to the original orientation. So he's constantly moving back and forth. So by the time Gauguin goes back to Tahiti for the second and final time, he's got to be much more ingenious in how he's using materials. He starts to use discarded indigenous wood, and this greatly informs his production. He produces a suite of late woodblock prints that are comprised of 15 images, and it really is what I'm calling an innovative tour de force in just how he manages to create what he does with the materials that are available to him. So what we know is that Gauguin boasted, and this is a quote, "Half of the blocks have been used twice, and I'm the only person who can make prints that way." And for a long time, we were trying to figure out what is he talking about? Because when you look at the impressions, they're printed on papers, nothing very unusual in the papers. They're printed in black ink, so it's nothing like what he was experimenting with in the Noa Noa series. Instead, he was talking about the wood itself. So what he would do is he would go and he would forage and he would find wood. The wood in Tahiti was very uncultivated. It was certainly not like the wood blocks he was getting in Paris. So what he meant was that he would cut the blocks down laterally to reduce their thickness. So I just have to show you this with my hands. So if he has a thick block and he cuts it in half, he ends up with 2 pieces of wood. But instead of just using them like this, he's flipping it so he gets a mirror image, and then he's turning it. So he's trying to disguise the fact that they have the same contour. So I'll walk you through it. Te Autua, Rape of Europa. These are the prints. And whether it was a mistake or not, he did carve his signature into the block in the right direction so it prints in the wrong direction. Now here are the blocks. Wait, let me turn around. So I think you can see when you take the one and you flip it, you can see how they're mirror images of each other. So this is in part what we think he's talking about. In another example, you can see the saw marks that he used in this block. And I put 2 impressions of, again, 2 other works in this series where you can see the same kind of striation. The other block is not known to us, but when you overlay these, and again, if you go to the online catalog, you'll see how we've diagrammed these. Once again, you can see how they match up, and he's cut them through the center. And in the final example I'm going to show you, these are the 3 largest prints in the series. And this he used horizontally. But if you turn it, the grain matches up again. So this, ingenuity out of necessity. And we see this over and over again in how he uses materials. So now I want to move on and try to contextualize some of these observations within the exhibition and within the sort of gallery setting. So I'm going to go back to my text a little bit. When Roberta Smith asked in her 2014 review of MoMA's incredible exhibition, Gauguin Metamorphoses, how many more exhibitions can radically reshape our understanding of a major 19th century French painter? And I emphasize the word painter. Little did she realize how much reshaping had taken place in MoMA's exhibition galleries. The seed Star Figura planted there took root in our minds. And by our, I include the chair of the Art Institute's Department of European Painting and Sculpture, who's my collaborator, the curator of the exhibition, Gloria Groom, I'm sure some of you know, as well as my colleague in paper conservation, Mary Broadway, who is our associate paper conservator. And all of the technology you're going to see here is thanks to Mary, because I couldn't talk my way into explaining Photoshop to any of you. So we would work out the ideas, she would diagram, and we really had a very nice team. I was able to also have a postdoctoral scientist on our team from Paris who worked with us for a year, and she did a lot of the analysis that I'm going to refer to as well. And I think it was just that perfect team where you have your curator, your conservator, and your scientist, so that you pose these questions and together as a team find some answers. So we initially worried about the overlap between Metamorphoses and our own ambitions for Gauguin, artist as alchemists. After all, that exhibition and the accompanying catalog had very effectively aligned technical study of the artworks with the story of their making. But the discoveries made during the course of a 4-year, in-depth research project carried out at the Art Institute helped to allay our concerns that there might not be anything new to say. We carried out research for this interactive catalog on 9 of our paintings, 1 ceramic, and over 200 graphic works. And I think that's a big key, is when you're going to do a technical study of this nature, and when I talk about chronology, you have to study a really large body of work. And we had so many in Chicago, and then going to MoMA and seeing so many on the walls there, it finally clicked that there were patterns that emerged. And on the walls of that exhibition in particular, there were impressions from the Clark Art Institute that looked so much like the Chicago impressions that you started to see patterns emerging. So with just very straightforward technical study. So you start with the low tech, the transmitted light, the raking light, the UV examinations, all of this figures into the online catalog. But in addition to that, then we started doing things like scanning XRF so we could get a sense of the disbursement of the printing inks and the pigments on the surface of the papers. We did pigment analysis, dye analysis, binder analysis. We used FTIR, SIRS for the dyes, GC mass spec for the binders, and after writing a grant, we were able to use photometric stereo, and by collaborating with scientists at Northwestern in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, we were able to do some surface shape studies. And if we have time, I'll get to that. And if we don't, it's online. So it's the beauty, I can say it's online. So our curatorial conservation partnership centered on technical investigations that would come to shape the exhibition rather than the opposite, rather than the other way around. So focusing on his complex artistic practice as represented in the Chicago collections furthered our understanding of what he was doing. So I'm going to start again with Gauguin's Noa Noa woodblock prints and use those to make some comparisons. So the first thing I should tell you is that after his first trip to Tahiti, Gauguin came back to Paris, and in late 1893, an exhibition of these paintings of 43, maybe, paintings was held at Durand Ruel. Only about 8, I think, sold. Not many sold. He was incredibly disappointed. Of course, his greatest fans were other artists. Degas bought things out of the sale, I think maybe 3 paintings. But he felt that the general public really didn't understand his imagery. So his idea in producing Noa Noa was to familiarize them with this Tahitian imagery. And he started, again, I showed you 2 examples. Here's another example. So this particular impression of Noa Noa, this is Maruru from Noa Noa, and it's one of the impressions that's on the Japanese laminated paper that I told you about with watercolors. You can see the pigment analysis that was done, and in particular, I want you to look at areas that look like this. In through here, they're kind of light brown. In through here that are light brown. There's been a lot of scholarship on these Noa Noa prints. Some of it will talk about clouds that appear behind the figure. Some of it will talk about, and I'll show you in this area, that this is vapor emanating from the idol's mouth. And again, this is something that Gauguin would love, this ambiguity, this ambiguous narrative, this ability to read into his impressions. But in this impression in particular, we found that what was really in that light brown was cadmium yellow that had discolored. And only about 2 months before we started looking at the pigments, a paper had come out about discoloration of cadmium yellow in Matisse's works. And so using that analysis as our starting off point, we realized that in this instance, Gauguin was using a cadmium yellow. You can also see here in this area that there was a cochineal lake that was being used that had significantly faded. And again, knowing that recolorizations are subjective, we hope that by recolorizing this, we at least give you some idea of what impressions like this would have looked like when they left Gauguin's hands before they discolored or faded. And there's the painting. So here, let's see where I am. This is Gauguin's hut, and this is the mango tree, and there was a mango grove adjacent to his hut that you also see in the painting, and I think the parallel's pretty obvious here. So the turning point for our study was in September of 2015 when we traveled to Paris to actually see the Noa Noa manuscript. And I honestly didn't know what to expect. But how do I explain this? Because this is not seen by very many people, Many of you probably know the Louvre has a group of boxes that are called the red boxes. And if you see something that is housed in a red box, you get to see it once in your life. And so for many years, Noa Noa was kept in this precious red box section. And when we started turning the pages, we saw that. And that's just one of many, many, many examples. Incredible reds and magentas and purples and blues. Additionally, we also learned through our study that, like Van Gogh, and if you look at the Met's publication on some of Van Gogh's inks, where they discovered purple, Gauguin too was using a lot of purple ink. And so we were able to analyze those inks in our drawings and found that, again, inks with these chromium components, that many of the drawings that came out of Gauguin's sketchbooks had that were very vibrant purple. So again, you go back into Noa Noa and you see this purple ink all over the place. And you also see blue ink and a blue-green ink. And here again, you really get that visual standard by which you can go back and judge not only the Noa Noa group in the watercolors, but also a lot of these pen and ink drawings that look brown now, shades of brown and black. So while most of us in this room are familiar with Gauguin's Noa Noa manuscript, it's not well known to the exhibition-going public, since this is only the second time the volume will travel outside of France since entering the Louvre's collection in 1927. We're hoping that this amazing object will take on new meaning through its context in the exhibition. From our scientific investigations, we've learned, and as I've just shown you, that at least for Maruru, what had been described as, and this is a quote, the relative colorlessness, as one scholar put it, of the Noa Noa prints is not a result of the artist's intentions, but rather to the selective fading and chemical alteration of certain dyes and pigments, as well as the discoloration of the paper supports. So very quickly, in another example, when you look at this print, in reality, it's very flat, it's very dark, and it's very difficult to visually differentiate foreground from middle ground from background. Again, Celine's pigment analysis, the print, and our recolorization. So again, a cochineal lake really informs the reading. And you can see in the background, you have a sunset that reflected into the river behind the figure. And you, by knowing what was originally going on, you can see how you can establish the depth in the composition. I referred earlier to the pink papers. This is an example of a first date impression of that same universe is created, where on the back of ours you can see these pink tones. Here's a magnificent impression in the Princeton University Art Museum, where it really is still very vibrantly pink. And again, you see an early impression. Here, these are aniline dye components that have faded, but in most instances, when you look at these papers today, they look tan is probably the best way to describe them. Golden, tan, not even cream. Okay. Another comparison that we'll make in the exhibition is the relationship, or, and I'm not even sure this is a word, the interrelatedness between the artist's carving of three-dimensional tikis, his decorative friezes, and the wood-carved matrices for printing. So this is a known comparison. I think it's pretty obvious here. We've got thematic and cross-media connections, but more so, when you imagine this. So when you take the teatro print and my colleague Peter Zagers put this together out of an oatmeal box, it really gives you a sense of even the three-dimensionality in the prints. Let's take it one step further. While it's been difficult to convince some art historians that there is indeed a direct correlation between Gauguin's carving of decorative friezes and printing matrices in the physical context of studio practice, the discovery of this block in a Swiss collection makes the relationship all the more tangible. Now, on the screen right now, I'm showing you a frieze. I'm showing you a bas-relief. But before it was a bas-relief, it was a matrix for printing. So going back to our initial observations, he's doing his usual. He's double printing. He's using stencils to introduce color. Here, he's hand coloring with watercolor. He made a handful of impressions from the block I just showed you before he went back into it and transformed it into the bas-relief that you see. If you look at the back of this, there are 3 different matrices carved into the block for printing. And in fact, this one, I think it's this one in the middle, he actually printed and cut an impression that he hand-colored and pasted into the Noa Noa manuscript. So I think there's no better correlation than seeing how this block started and how it was transformed. In addition, we used photometric stereo, and we took the data from that, and we did a 3D printing of the Maruru block that's in the collection of the Art Institute. And by having this plastic, I wish I had brought it, replica of the surface, we were actually able to take various carving tools and find similarities between the carving that we see in the blocks for printing and the size and the shapes of the gouges in the carvings that are done as wood carvings in their own right. Oh, I want to stop this. No, can I? Okay, so to further emphasize the materiality of the artworks presented in the exhibition, we've crafted 4 short videos to provide visual context for Gauguin's varied and innovative methods. These will be strategically placed adjacent to the objects they relate to so that museum goers can directly engage with the materials presented. The first video will demonstrate the making of an earthenware object analogous to the artist's monstrosities, which is what he called them. The 3 remaining videos are going to feature these various methods to produce multiples on paper. There's going to be a video on monotype, transfer drawing, and what I'm going to show you next is a video on the various woodblock printing techniques. Now, this is a rough cut. I just got this 2 days ago, so there's no text with it yet. We're going to try to keep the text as minimal as possible because we really believe that a picture is worth 1,000 words, especially when you're talking about such complex methods to the general public. So first, the carving. And this is work that's being done by Christina Taylor, who was a former intern with us and has just started at the Harvard Art Museums. She is also a master printmaker, and Christina came out to Chicago a few weeks ago. So we're showing the incising here, the carving. See again a very small number of tools, and then we're going to start with just straightforward printing. And again, assuming that the public has not really doesn't really understand relief printing unless they can see it. She's taking a cloth, putting in a twill impression, which he would often do. She's also wiping in to lift ink and remove it, which is another technique he used. And somehow we'll get these words in here short and sweet. So that's the most straightforward printing. And there's the twill impression. Now we're going to offset, basically it's printing with multiple times by skewing the registration, as I showed you in that Noa Noa print. And this is going to end up being shorter as well. We're going to start cutting. So what he would do is print the most complex in the three colors that I showed you, something that looks very much like a chrome yellow. And then he would go back in with more of an ochre, a yellow ochre. I think we're going to cut some of this inking and rolling. I think people will get the picture. But now taking the yellow impression, putting it back on the block, deliberately skewing the impression. And now in a final step, printing the block in black. And again, skewing the registration. So that will end up being your final impression. The next is very straightforward. It's just adding the watercolor, hand coloring. But here, what we want to show is that he's got one piece of paper and then a second piece of paper. We tried to select papers that were as close as possible to his. And then this, I'm sure, is going to be very straightforward for people to understand, just coming back in and hand coloring the impressions. Now the final one with the wax and the resinous material transfer, this is the most difficult one, and we hope this is going to work. So again, a tone block, a yellow tone block with the chrome yellow. Now we did it quite evenly to make the point, but Gauguin did not. It was much more reticulated. A piece of glass over the block to site specifically apply a very waxy resinous material that would then be transferred from the glass, because you can imagine if you're putting this on the wood directly, you're just going to muck up and mess up all of the interstices. So here a very dimensional material is transferred. We take that, we put it back down. And we print our impression. And there you can see these islands of media. Our unique multiples. So there's that. Okay. Great. So this is the inside cover of the exhibition catalog. The exhibition is going to include some 240 objects. They're going to be dispersed among 9 galleries, in which small clusters of objects will be connected thematically and across media in each gallery. The artist's creative processes and varied use of materials will be noted throughout. The exhibition will include a display of 19th century art materials and tools similar to those used by the artist. Thank you, eBay. Peppered throughout, there's going to be a selection of folkloric, tribal, and other comparative works that will appear to signify the artist's cross-cultural visual prompts. And these are going to include a Breton coif, some tapa cloth, and a Marquesan tiki. We even found an Edison mimeograph that we're going to include in a case with Les Sourires, which is a periodical that he was printing in Tahiti. And that's where we end up. So, okay, I think I'm good. 10 minutes. All right. So if you have any questions, yes?
Were there ever impressions on both layers of papers? Were the color or prints
On the opposite side, no. But what you do see is because they're so absorbent, the watercolor will wick through. And often when you look at the back, you get a better sense of what the color is because on the back it's less faded. And truth be told, in some instances where sheets in the collection were partially delaminated, we delaminated them for the study. And they'll come back together again. I saw a question, Erica?
Do you know why he did this lamination, what he was wanting to achieve?
Yeah, I think what was going on was when you're hand printing, you can't really control your pressure evenly. And I think it was a way to make the support robust enough that when he was rubbing by hand, he wasn't sort of embedding it too much that he couldn't get it out. He likes his mistakes too. There were a lot of impressions where you see fibers would be left on the block and there's abrasion. But in most instances, it was for that purpose, it was to help him get it back off the block. And for the later prints, he's using the thinnest of thinnest sheets of paper. And in those instances, we find he's using a secondary sheet of paper in the printing that he then removes later. So he's very aware of the fragility of his papers. Yes?
These are all very Western techniques and Western pigments and the chromium. Is there any evidence of native?
No, and I am the most disappointed person in the room. I wanted so much to find him using something indigenous. And it's also interesting because even Tapa, this is a man who was poorer than poor towards the end of his life. He didn't have materials. We find Tapa in portfolio covers. He fashioned few very beautiful, and he would put his prints in them and he would put drawings in them. But why he never would pick up Tapa to actually make art, I think was very conscious choice on his part. While he was a complex guy, so while in many respects we talk about him wanting to embrace Tahiti, embrace the culture and the people, he was still a Frenchman. He was still the gentleman, if you will, artist. And you never see it. You never see it. And it must have something to do with the associations of Tapa with the indigenous culture and he as the artist from another culture, because there's no explanation when he's working so hard to find materials to make art on why he didn't use Tapa.
What about the wood blocks? Aren't they indigenous wood?
Yes, the wood blocks, yes. The wood blocks are indeed, and the wood carvings are in indigenous wood, and the tikis are in indigenous wood, yes. Tapa is bark cloth, where you would take the inner bark and you would pound it with a special tool and form it into sheets. Very coarse, very textured, a material you'd think you would love. But that's what it is, a bark cloth. Bark paper. I don't know. We always have these discussions. Yes?
Another matrix question. Maybe I just missed that. How do we know that for the monotypes he would use glass rather than copper or metal?
Well, that's a good point. We're not sure he could be using copper or metal, but because we see such a direct correlation between works that are not monotypes, that we're thinking he's putting them under the glass and using them to see where he wants to go. So the glass is a way for him to be site specific. The same way by putting the wood block under it, he could be site-specific in locating these resinous waxy materials underneath the black printing layer. It's a similar idea, where had he used copper or another metal, he would just be working straight on that. Peggy?
Yeah, but when Christina was printing the various colors, I didn't see any registration. Is every skewed color random?
Random, totally random. Yeah, never a registration mark, never a pinhole, never a line, nothing. Reba?
I'm just wondering if you could say anything about, in general, about the papers that come up top, aside from the pink papers and the Japanese paper sandwich. Are there any other observations or generalizations you can make about the papers?
Yes. When he prints his monotypes, they're usually made on very lovely Japanese vellums of the type that has the beautiful decal edges, the beautiful translucent surfaces where you can see all the paper fibers. That's one type. Then what started happening, and I can't remember off the top of my head, there was an issue of L'Estampe Originale where one of his prints appeared, one of the Manau Tupapaus. And he started taking other people's prints from that volume, which was what we would call the imitation vellums, that have these very hard, smooth surfaces, which were really great for printing monotypes. And he started using those. And just last year, a monotype came on the market that is actually on the same piece, same print from the L'Estampe Originale. So one bit of it is in Chicago and one bit of it is somewhere else in the world now, but briefly went through Christie's. And these came from the same piece of paper. And so when we started looking for those telltale signs, you can find little bits of other prints from that volume. So it's either what I'll call the real Japanese vellum or these imitation Japanese vellums. When he returns to Tahiti the second time, then that's when you really see him starting to experiment because the papers are so tissue thin. So in that case, he will print them and then he'll paste them down onto a sturdier Western paper. But then, because obviously he can't help himself, because they're so translucent, sometimes he adheres them face up, sometimes he adheres them face down, sometimes he adheres two together, sometimes he adheres a second state over a first state so you can see motifs from the first state through the second state. So again, he's always playing with these materials. When he finally, it's his final moment, he's doing Les Sourires and then these late transfer drawings, there was a moment when he's working in an office, a governmental office, and he's using a very poor quality Western paper that we think ultimately he ended up getting a roll of because the transfer drawings get very large. And we think he took paper in a roll to the Marquesas and started experimenting more and more with these transfer drawing techniques. So again, the papers even follow a chronology based on circumstance. And I should say the wood blocks that he purchased early on for Noa Noa, we think he purchased about 12 of them. He had just come into an inheritance. And they're the finest, best wood engraving wood blocks that money could buy. And so it's amazing to juxtapose those blocks with the innovations in how he was able to take the blocks of indigenous or found wood and really take those and transform them into printing matrices as well. Okay. Oh, yes? Hi.
You said when he printed the monotype, sometimes he would print from glass and sometimes it would be from paper. How do you know, like how can you say that they weren't always with the glass?
That's a really good question. Yes. By the surfaces, yes. When you look at a glass to paper transfer, he knew how to manipulate the consistency of the washes that he was putting on the glass. And the best way I can explain this to you is when he then takes the paper and he lifts it off the glass, there's this beautiful reticulation that forms. And there are these peaks, so that because the glass itself isn't absorbing any of that paint, it's all coming off in these almost like whipped cream peaks under a microscope on the surface of the paper. When it's a paper-to-paper transfer, especially if it's a laid paper, you'll often get the paper texture from one paper onto another. So in the case of the MoMA matrix, there's a little sort of dip in the upper right. There's a little sort of rounded area. Well, even that, when you look at our impressions that were pulled from it, even the paper dips a little in our impression too, because these papers are all dampened, I should say. They're all wetted to some degree. Nothing is done dry. So there's some confirmation to whatever they're coming in contact with. So in looking at those monotypes, it's very clear that it's a very different type of transfer process, and the media sits very differently on the paper when it's a paper-to-paper transfer. Thanks for asking. That's a good one.
So when you did the paper-to-paper, like with the MoMA matrix, would you have to then go back to the matrix and like reapply?
Yes. He would go back to the matrix and reapply, or he would go into the monotype after he printed it and take brush. Every once in a while, you will see he's come back and he's enriched it and he's heightened it, perhaps because it was the third or the fourth pull and it just didn't have that same rigor. But you do see both instances. And we did see differences layering in one of ours, which we think is the third pull, where he came back and he tried to use the same kind of red, but the second time it was a little bluer, it had a little more purple in it. And you can see that very distinctly under the microscope. The other thing you can see is a roller, that when he printed and he used a roller, it's a very distinct, harder line of where the roller went over the paper and the glass. So thank you so much.